He became an inspiration to right-wingers everywhere. Elon Musk shared a chainsaw with him at this year's CPAC, and both Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch heaped praise on him this summer. However, in the past couple of months, it looks like Millet's project has stalled. GDP has flatlined, the trade account has flipped back into deficit, and earlier this month his party performed remarkably poorly at the Buenos Aires local elections, losing to the left-wing Peronist bloc by 13 points. So in this video, we're going to explain what's gone wrong for Millet, and what might happen next. Big problems facing Millet at the moment. 1. Argentina's recovery has apparently stalled, and 2. His so-called strong peso policy looks increasingly unsustainable. Let's start with Argentina's economic recovery. To understand why things don't look great at the moment, you need a bit of context. In short, there are 4 components to GDP. Government spending, business investment, household consumption, i.e. people buying and consuming stuff, and net exports, i.e. the value of your exports minus the value of your imports. This is a bit of a simplification, but Millet basically argues that Argentina's economy has long been overweighted towards government spending, as evidenced by Argentina's recurring budget deficits, and domestic consumption, as evidenced by Argentina's recurring trade deficit. In other words, the fact that Argentinians import more than they export. The reforms he pushed through at the start of his term, which basically involved cutting government spending and devaluing the peso to reduce imports, were aimed at reducing both of these components, and were thus always going to temporarily reduce GDP. And, well, this is exactly what happened. In the first half of 2024, Argentina sank into a deep recession, with GDP falling by over 4% year-on-year in July. But Millet's hope was that Argentina would then see, in his words, a V-shaped recovery, driven by exports and investment, the other 2 components of GDP. Again, this is a bit of a simplification, but Millet hoped that by reducing taxes, cutting red tape, and simplifying Argentina's currency regime, he'd make it easier for businesses to invest. Millet also hoped that devaluing the peso would make Argentina's exports more competitive internationally. Originally, it looked like this might work. In the second half of 2024, the Argentinian economy saw a dramatic recovery, reaching a year-on-year growth rate of 6.7% in January, one of the highest in the world. However, in the past couple of months, Argentina's recovery has stalled. While year-on-year growth rates still look pretty good, this is only because Argentina's economy was doing really quite terribly a year ago, and they disguised the fact that, for 3 of the past 4 months, Argentina's economy has actually shrunk, with consecutive declines in May and June, and a further decline expected in July. This is because both investment and exports have been weaker than expected. When it comes to investment, Millet has introduced a number of eye-catching policies in the hope of tempting business back to Argentina, including a new citizenship by investment program, reportedly for anyone investing at least $500,000 in approved Argentinian businesses, and the so-called RIGI scheme, which offers tax cuts and exemptions for companies investing $200 million or more in Argentinian industry. Unfortunately for Millet, these policies are yet to bear fruit, and investment into Argentina has been relatively meagre over the past 18 months. When it comes to exports, Millet would have been hoping that a combination of more investment, deregulation, and a weaker peso would all stimulate exports. But again, this hasn't worked that well. While some export-oriented sectors, most notably the mining industry, have rebounded, others, including agriculture and manufacturing, have not. And the OECD actually expects net exports to act as a drag on GDP in 2025 and 2026. This is in part because, and this takes us nicely onto the second part of this video, the peso is still overvalued, which makes Argentina's exports more expensive for the rest of the world. For context, when Millet took over, the peso essentially had 2 exchange rates. The official rate, claimed and managed by the government, and the unofficial or actual market rate, known as the blue rate. When Millet took charge in late 2023, the official rate was about 370 to the dollar, while the unofficial rate was about 1,000 to the dollar. In other words, the government was pretending that the peso was worth about 3 times as much as it actually was. Millet did dramatically devalue the peso's official rate by about 50% early on in his term, but it was still overvalued. Nonetheless, to avoid stoking inflation, Millet refrained from another large devaluation, and instead moved to what's known as a crawling peg, devaluing the peso by 2% each month with the idea that the official rate would eventually catch up with the unofficial rate. This didn't happen because the peso's unofficial rate kept declining even faster. So in April of this year, Milei took the leap, scrapped most capital controls and let the peso float, essentially unifying the two rates. This worked surprisingly well, and the newly unified peso quickly stabilized. But Milei was still resistant to further declines. So whenever the peso came under pressure, he'd use a whole load of complicated measures, like fiddling with interest rates and reserve requirements, to give it a boost. While this succeeded in keeping inflation down, month-on-month inflation is now seemingly stabilised below 2%, higher interest rates also dampened GDP growth, and after a while, Milei ran out of clever tricks to keep the peso afloat, so had to resort to burning through his foreign exchange reserves. In other words, spending the billions of dollars the IMF gave him earlier this year to just buy up pesos on the open market. This is fundamentally unsustainable. Argentina's treasury has already spent over 10% of the $2 billion or so in foreign currency deposits it had at the start of August, and the peso has still fallen to a 12-month low of over 1,400 to the dollar. Milei's life has been made even more difficult by his loss at the local elections in Buenos Aires earlier this month. Milei's party massively underperformed the polls, losing to the Peronist coalition by 13 points. The prospect of the Peronists reasserting themselves in Argentina's politics has spooked investors, triggering a further sell-off in the peso and Argentinian bonds. The risk for Milei is that he gets trapped in a vicious cycle, whereby weak results at the ballot box trigger sell-offs in the market, stunting any prospective economic recovery and undermining public faith in Milei, leading to more weak results at the ballot box, etc. This is why next month's midterms are so crucial. It's his best chance to arrest this vicious cycle before it's too late. With the rise of complex geopolitical situations like these, as well as confusing economics and the growth of AI, things are moving very fast right now. It would be sensible then to begin improving your critical thinking skills so that you can keep sharp and better understand what's going on. And the best way to do this is through Brilliant. Brilliant knows that learning a little every day is one of the most important things you can do, both for personal and professional growth. So not only do they offer a perfect mix of engaging problems and competitive features, they also keep you motivated with daily encouragement, helping you better understand the world around you. Whether you choose to dig deep into complex topics such as how AI works in the world, or stretch your analytical muscles through logic and code breaking, Brilliant can offer you everything you need, whether you're at home or on the go. You can become a better thinker and problem solver, one hands-on lesson at a time. To start your learning journey and try Brilliant for free, visit brilliant.org/TLDR